Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Come Off Conqueror show. I'm your host, Bonnie, and I am here today with my beautiful friend, Jenny. And she comes to us from Kentucky, which is kind of fun. And I'm totally jealous about. I don't know if she knows this, but I really would love to live back there again. And we're interviewing her today because we're going to talk about boundaries. And Jenny has been on a long journey learning about boundaries and how to create them and how to have a healthier relationship with some of her family members and just people in general. And I really wanted to interview her for a long time and finally got the guts to ask her because every now and then she'll post. Well, I shouldn't say every now and then. It's pretty much every day she posts something on her Facebook or her social media about healing from trauma and boundaries. And her insights are always so valuable. And so I'm super excited for you guys to learn from her too and to hear what she has to say about boundaries. Jenny is super passionate about self-development and empowering other people. She is so sweet and so kind. And if she's not spending her time with her husband and her adorable kids, she is ideating. Is that how you say that? I don't even know. Ideating?
Ideating.
Ideating. Okay. I can read. It's good. I went to high school. Anyway, she about her next digital course and her other online marketing ideas. She is a marketing queen. So if you happen to have a small business and you need some marketing help, feel free to reach out to her. But that's not why she's here. She's here today. She is in the process of writing a few books, though. So maybe we'll get a little bit of a preview about that. And we'll definitely update this video and the links and stuff once she finally has those published. We'll make sure we put those there. Of course, I put her other links in there if you want to connect with her and stuff. She's got an awesome podcast and she's super fun to follow on social media. So do it. She's awesome. Jenny, welcome to the show.
I feel like we could talk about so much stuff. So I'm grateful. We've been planning this for like a year, well, 2 years almost, but it just took you sending me a text like, hey, are you free tomorrow? And put my feet to the fire of like, okay, this is happening tomorrow. So I'm super grateful and happy to be here.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure. You're amazing. And she's so wise. And like she said, we really could talk about so many different things. Man, we'll just have to do more videos. That's all there is to it. So, Jenny, tell us kind of what you think. We were talking earlier about kind of the point of the show today was talk about boundaries and what are they? How do we set healthy ones? Why do we not set healthy boundaries? And what can we do for those of us who have a really hard time with this concept? I'm not pointing fingers or anything, but those of us who have a hard time saying no and we tend to overcommit ourselves and get a little resentful. And then there's just this vicious cycle. So let's dive in. What do you think?
I feel like you could probably share a lot of insight on boundaries too, because as you were talking, I'm like, is she describing me? But I think for everyone that's listening, it's important to recognize that boundaries, first of all, will be a very personal thing. And there's going to be relationships that you'll have with people that they won't be comfortable with your boundaries. And there might be other people that you can walk all over because they don't have boundaries. And I guess the best way to describe boundaries is the standards that you set for yourself. And I am a recovering people pleaser. And it only took me enrolling in therapy with a professional therapist for me to recognize the way that my behavior was creeping into relationships and hurting myself. And so lack of boundaries, number one, will hurt yourself more than anybody else. And so when we think about boundaries, think about them as a safeguard for yourself. Think of them as a form of self-love. And I've made these incredible connections through therapy for 5 or 6 months because it's been really uncomfortable to recognize that things that I loved about myself were actually hurting myself. And a really good example is I suffer from that acronym FOMO, fear of missing out. And I was able to make the connection that one of the reasons that I fear of missing out is because I feel that if people are having fun without me, then I don't matter. And that's obviously false, right? So being able to set the boundary is what is a healthy boundary that I can set? And I think the most important thing is recognizing, like you said, when you have resentment, boom. That's like when we talk about how do we set boundaries, we need to look at our negative emotions and tie them to experiences and kind of sit in that space asking ourselves, why am I uncomfortable right now? And when we think about boundaries, we think of someone that we're resentful towards or someone that's hurt our feelings, and we think we're going to put up boundaries and we're going to restrict these people from being in our lives. And that's not what boundaries are, right? Boundaries are the way for us to heal. And we have to be uncomfortable with recognizing the negative emotions in our life. And resentment, like we've said, is just unmet expectations that weren't like communicated. And that's kind of on us. So it's a very personal thing. So if those, as you're listening to us have this discussion, things are going to stick out to you that maybe we didn't say. And those are the things that you can start tapping into to say, you know what, I want to create a boundary here because I'm sick of being resentful. I'm sick of getting my feelings hurt, or I'm sick of getting so mad so quickly.
So what would you say, let's define boundaries then? Because you said boundaries aren't cutting people out of your life who were maybe mean to you or hurtful or something, right? Like sometimes I do think that that's like an easy, that's probably like the go-to answer for what a boundary is.
Well, and it's interesting because there's a mental illness called splitting, and it's under the category of borderline personality disorder. And it's when someone hurts your feelings, you just cut them out completely. And I noticed that behavior. So a little bit of background for everybody. I enrolled in therapy mostly because my parents were going through a separation and divorce last year. And I had never, ever, ever, ever expected my parents to get divorced. I am married to a divorced man. It has incredibly blessed my life, but I never thought that my parents would get to this stage in their marriage. And so as this is happening, I'm learning things that aren't matching with the reality of my childhood, my current life, and it caused a lot of confusion. And I started to think a lot about my own personal life and how I was manipulated by one of my parents to do whatever they said to do. Mm. And my husband recognized that after we got married because I became a people pleaser. Mm-hmm. So it was only through therapy and really seeing my world crumble. And maybe some of you have had that through traumatic events where you're like, that is not the way I even pictured things going. And there's a lot of therapists that say that trauma, the severity of trauma, is induced by the surprise of it. So we might have experiences that maybe weren't a big deal to somebody else. Maybe someone kind of thrived through their parents' divorce. But I was so surprised by the separation and divorce that it was pretty traumatic for me. And so
you're an adult at this point. I mean, you've left your house, like you're no longer living at your parents or whatever, but the fact that you can still feel trauma by your parents' divorce is proof that it hits you at any age, really.
Yeah. And trauma can be so many things for so many people. And so when we talk about boundaries, boundaries are the standards for our emotional health. What are things that we will permit and we will not permit in our life? And we have to tie them to the emotions that we're having. Otherwise, we will continue to have those negative emotions. And something that I've recently set a boundary with, I've had to do this with my dad actually, is I realized that when I have an opinion and I share it, he says that I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's very invalidating. So now I feel invalidated and I feel sad. So I have to sit in those feelings like, why? It took me a long time to figure out the word invalidating. Why does he always dismiss my thing, my opinion, me as a person? And then I realized like, it's nothing against me, even though my feelings are hurt. So then I decided I need to let him know how I feel. So that was the first step of setting up the boundary. And so I let him know in person. I said, I don't appreciate when I share how I feel and you tell me that I'm wrong when it's how I feel. And he dismissed me again. and said, well, you don't understand the full story or whatever. I said, no, that's an example of you invalidating me. It's not healthy. It's not kind, and it's toxic. And I don't have to be in a relationship with anybody that makes me feel that way. And sometimes we might think, well, isn't that pretty bossy or, privileged? How dare you cut out this out of your life because of this? But that's why boundaries are so hard, because they're so confusing. We want to have peaceful relationships with those around us, but we have to guard our soul. That's the best way to say it. I want to love my dad still. So I cannot be in situations where I allow him to invalidate me or tell me that I'm wrong based on how I feel. So that's like a boundary. And it's really hard because I want him to change, but it's not my responsibility to change him.
So boundaries are setting up the expectation of how you want someone to treat you and how you want to treat yourself, right? So there's boundaries with people all around you, every single relationship, including the one that you have with yourself, right? Like, what are you going to? And I think somebody, man, I don't remember the quote, but I loved it. It had to do with integrity and how having integrity is following through with a commitment that you've made, not just to other people, but to yourself. So, for example, if you made the commitment that you're not going to eat chocolate today or whatever, like, and the most delicious chocolate cake is sitting in front of you and it's right there, right? Like, you made a commitment not to eat it. And so you not doing that makes you feel good about yourself because you had integrity. You followed through with a commitment that you made, and then that made it stronger so that the next time something like chocolate comes in front of you again, then you can look back on that past experience. I had integrity. I followed through with my commitment, with my decision. I can be strong again this time. And the more you do that, the stronger you get. So with that example, do you feel like, with, let's take your dad, or anyone really, like you setting that precedence and you cutting him off and saying, no, this is an example of you, you didn't even use gaslighting. You said, this is you dismissing me. You didn't even say, dad, you're being a narcissist, right? Like some of these psychological terms that we hear through a lot of these self-help programs. But you said, dad, you're dismissing me. You're hurting my feelings. You cannot tell me that my feelings are not real. Do you feel like, I'm sure that was really hard and it took a lot of courage and bravery to do it. So good for you, because I know how uncomfortable that conversation is to have and how hard it is to tell somebody who is a strong person and an authority figure and somebody that you love. Like, doing that is really difficult, but you did it one time. Do you feel like now it's easier to do it again? Has he crossed the line again? And have you had to remind him of where the line is? And is it easier to do that now with other people?
That's a really good question that I hope I can answer. And I might cry because
I'm sorry.
the journey has been lethargic, but good. And so something that came to my mind as you were talking is that boundaries, when we decide to set them, is how we extend empathy to ourselves. So I'm deciding that it's not okay to be treated that way. And I'm telling the person that's treating me poorly that it's not acceptable either. Because I set empathy for myself, I can now extend it to him because I've communicated it. Just like you said, that we communicate what we're willing to endure, not endure, do. Because I have extended that as a form of empathy to myself, I now can have empathy for him to try to understand maybe why he is invalidating me. Mm-hmm. And I'm not his therapist. He won't go to therapy. I definitely think through reading books that he does need to be diagnosed and treated by a professional. But because I did that, I took my power back. And yes, I did that with empathy. And that is the true superpower. He continues to break boundaries all the time. So I was in Utah for 6 weeks and I saw him 3 times because I have to have those boundaries. And it was really difficult not to go over there a lot because he's my dad and I want my kids to know him. Sure. But if there's a chance that there's a fire in a home and I see it and I intentionally take my kids in to show them the artwork on the wall and there's a chance that they could get burned, that's on me. That's not me extending empathy to myself or my children.
Right.
And so it's tricky, but it's so important for us to think about how we are empathetic to ourselves, because that's the only way I could have enforced boundaries, because I was trained and ingrained and manipulated to believe that I was to do everything that this person said in the name of honoring my parents. And it was only through other people talking to me and getting professional help and even marrying outside of my family, right? Like my spouse is like, that's not normal. It's okay to talk about these things. If your feelings are hurt, to talk to a friend about it. Like, hey, what do you think about this situation? And they can let you know, like, hey, yeah, I do think you should set a boundary, or I don't think that's okay. Or there's a lot of times where my resentment is my own problem to work on, right? And that's another reason, is because it's that poison that we drink and we think we're going to kill somebody else. That's all resentment is. And so I knew that wasn't going to serve me. So now that I've had that boundary set, I can't go back to it, right? I can't backslide from it, because the empathy is there. I felt good. I felt peaceful, and I want to keep building upon that empathy and compassion, because you don't ever want to set a boundary out of resentment. And I have an example of that. When I was in college, I did a study abroad, and I had a close friend with me. And I was just getting into photography, and she was always my model. And I took her around everywhere. We took all these pictures, and then she got a boyfriend, and she was getting engaged, and she was like, I want you to be my photographer. And I was like, that's great. I would love to do that. And I hadn't shot very many weddings, so I gave her a really affordable price. And then we went on our study abroad to Peru, and she came with me in the art department, and her fiance was at home, and we spent like a whole month together. It was so fun. I continued to take pictures of her because she's always been a good friend. And then when I got home, I got a piece of Mel, and it was an engagement photo from her. And I wasn't the person that took the picture, and it was inviting me to her wedding. And I thought we had set the boundary that she wanted me to do this. And so more of a friend, I felt hurt that I was getting the information from a piece of Mel. So I called her and said, that was really hurtful that you couldn't just tell me, hey, so I found someone that's going to do it for free. I would have been like, yay, that's awesome. But that's not how it went. And then later on, I found out that after people had set me up like on blind dates, she would go on dates with these same guys, and she'd done it to other people. So in that moment, I felt like I couldn't move forward in a trusting way with her, because I had found things out by her never admitting them. So I had to look at my feelings. Like, I felt betrayed, and I didn't know how to set a boundary to make her work for the trust back. So I decided to exit the friendship. And it was a really easy decision, because the trust wasn't there, and I wasn't comfortable with building the trust back up. And I think that's a good example, because it's friendship. It's not family. It's not sticky. It's not a spouse. But to that day, this person still reaches out and says hi. And I will say hi, but I'm not really interested in building a relationship of trust, which is the only type of relationships I build. I'm a very authentic, disarming person, and I'm not going to do you dirty ever. And if I do, it's accidental. And then I'm going to tell you I'm going to ask you, what do I need to do to make a restitution with you? Because I'm an empathetic person, and I want that peace in my life. So that's an example of where I had to part ways, and I have never regretted the decision. I feel really peaceful about it. And being in a position where I was betrayed gave me empathy too, to not commit those acts to other people, if that makes sense.
So it sounds like it is easier to commit to those boundaries the more you do it. And it sounds like, there are times when cutting people out is the healthier and better decision. And I can agree with you on that. I had a therapist say the same thing. I don't even know how many therapists I've been to, guys, like a dozen. Too many. But clearly I need a lot of help, but that's okay. I've been through a lot. And anyway, with this one therapist in particular, excuse me, I'm recovering from this ridiculous cough that won't go away. And Anyway, this one therapist told me that there was a person in my life who was very toxic and total narcissist, and boundaries were a big issue. And even if I tried to set them, they were never um
Strong
hardly
enough.
ever were they. Well, it's not that they weren't strong enough, they just weren't honored, right? Like if I said, don't do this or don't say this, like you can't talk to me that way, it didn't matter, right? It didn't matter what the boundary was that I set. And that is a classic narcissist. And the more I read about narcissists, I talk about Dr. Armani. Amani, is that her name? You would think with how much I talk about her, I would get her name right. A lot. She has like a million videos on her on narcissism. And I read a book called How to Love the Self-Absorbed, or Loving the Self-Absorbed, something like that. We'll put a link to it in the bottom. And that helped a lot understanding what a narcissist was and how it doesn't matter what boundaries you've set, they are not capable of following them. That is just, unfortunately, it's a weird psychological disorder that basically is, they're incapable. And there are very few therapists out there who can successfully help a narcissist change. And a narcissist has to be able to recognize it in order to change. And how often do you think a narcissist actually recognizes they're a narcissist, right? Like one in a million. Anyway, but they said like that this person with what was going on, they're like, you just need to quit expecting this person to change. You need to quit expecting that they're going to be kind and loving and respectful. And every time you open up to them, they hurt you. So why do you keep putting yourself in this situation? Like, I know you love them. I know you want them in your life. I know that they, in theory should be in your life, but they are not capable of treating you the way that you want them to treat you. So stop letting them in. Have a surface relationship with this person and you will be much happier. Boy, that changed my life. I was finally able to have the type of relationship with this person that was healthy and good. And I've stopped resenting them and stopped being surprised by the stuff that comes out of their mouth. And, I'm no longer chained to this idea of who this person should be. And I'm finally able to release that. And now I can talk to them and be with them and celebrate birthdays and do all the things that I wanted to do in a state of peace and happiness for my own well-being. I also know
you bring up a really interesting point for everybody to remember, and that is you set a boundary for your own expectations. And that's what healed you. It wasn't that the narcissist got help. That's not the way it works, right? Like, and you called your expectation a chain, and that's what it is. And sometimes we think we have to go through trauma to set healthy boundaries, and that's not it. The secret is, if we're not setting boundaries, we don't have any. So even in healthy marriages with my spouse, we like joke when we set boundaries because we're like, are you going to break that? I'm like, well, let's see let's see what happens. But just to be able to have the open communication about what is expected and what is not expected and what is acceptable is a very, very healthy thing. And it does break the chains of resentment completely.
Do you feel like at first you were being like you're saying that you have empathy for yourself and it's self-love. Did you ever feel like when you were coming to this realization that you were being selfish? Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like, did you have to come to a point where you could say, choosing my happiness and choosing my well-being is okay? Does that make sense? Like, I know sometimes when people are abused, especially by a narcissist, if they've grown up in that environment, it's really hard to accept that your happiness and your well-being is, sorry, but I understand the feeling right now. Like, it's hard sometimes to accept that I'm worth it. Does that make sense?
Yes, because it's so funny. For those of you that are watching, Bonnie and I met in a Latter-day Saint female mastermind. And we went through Strength Finders, and it's an assessment that's like 30 minutes and you figure out what your top strengths were. And that was kind of liberating for me to see what some of my strengths were. And I kind of kept going and asking our coach, Jen, where else can I learn this? And she told me about this man who also lives in Layton, Utah. His name's Lane Monson, and he has an assessment called the Habit Finder. So I logged in and I like did it, and I got my type, my results, and it was like, you're an obligator. And I was like, oh, great. So I got on a call with him, and he like,
what's an obligator?
An obligator is like, I thrive better when I'm obligated to somebody.
Oh,
okay.
Okay.
So some people just get in and do it, but I'm like, I was a lifetime soccer player. I played in college. I was #1 in the nation for goals and assists. Like, I thought I came to earth to play soccer. So like having a coach is like right up my alley. So this wasn't like surprising that I thrive when someone's like going to cheer me on. But the thing that blew my mind is that the weaknesses of an obligator is that they tie their worth to their performance. And that's still me. Just like a half an hour ago on this couch before my husband went to work, I told him that I really struggle with my worth if I don't do anything all day. And this coach, Lane Monson, said, you could not get out of bed and you would still be worth it. And I said, yeah, I believe that because it's an eternal principle and I'm religious and I'm spiritual. Sure. But it doesn't apply to me.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, I have to apply to me. I'm sorry. I have to perform to show how worthy and awesome I am.
Uh-huh.
And like, I think sometimes trauma too is very compartmentalized, right? Because like, I would never say that to my kids. I would never say that to anybody else, but I can think it about myself, right? Like that's the spiritual self-harm. That's the emotional self-harm that I'm battling right now. And it's really interesting because I know that we are worthy and we are made of divine matter, and that we could watch Harry Potter every episode, every show in one day, and God would still love us. Our family would still love us. But I won't ever do that, because that doesn't make me feel like I have got the trophy of worth. So that's another reason that I am working with a professional therapist, because that's the cool thing about therapy is they're going to call you out on your false beliefs. And so it's really interesting now that I'm in this transitional phase where I recognize something that isn't right and still believe it, but don't press it upon everybody else. And there's a book by James Manton. It's called The Secret of Transitions. And he said that some people will never transition and become the best selves because they're too uncomfortable to be nothing. And it's the stage of like, okay, I want to be great, but I got to get over here. But like right here, you're going to feel like crap and you're not, and I'm like, that's what I need to embrace. I need to embrace the transition that like, I'm not the self-serving, super obedient daughter that's, under the cloak of unrighteous dominion is the best word for it. Mm-hmm. And I'm becoming free by giving myself more empathy and love. And so it's really been interesting, this journey of personal boundaries, because I am kind of reclaiming my worth back. Like, and so it's really interesting sometimes when we think that we want to fall on the sword to help somebody else, that we're actually just really depleting our blood and energy out of ourselves. Like my husband, I would told him I wanted to like deliver a baby natural. And he was like, just so you know, I love you. And there's no trophy for that. And I'm like, and when I was pregnant, he like had to lock me out of the house and like threw $200 in cash at me and was like, go buy clothes. And I kind of cried on the doorstep, like, no, don't make me take care of myself. And it's like, if you had a child like that, wouldn't that just be the biggest plea for help that, but I was raised by someone that has a mental illness. So they didn't see that. They actually loved that I didn't want to be, that it was painful to be locked out. They wanted me to say, I will serve you foot and hand. So anyways, that's such a long answer, but I truly believe that we have to find ways to set boundaries just to heal our inadequacies and our imperfections. And I've never been a perfectionist. I don't believe that it exists in this mortal life. So I'm okay with that. But I'm always working on that my performance, no performance is still worth just me as I am, right?
Man, we are cut from the same cloth. We knew that from the moment we met a few years ago. And Jen has been interviewed on our show. Everybody, she's talking about Jen Anderson, the one who talked about her cancer and some of the other traumas that she's been through and what it's helped her. We can link to that video below. She's amazing. And I it's so funny when you talk, I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like, I totally understand how you're feeling. The that your self-worth tied to performance and stuff is totally something that I have struggled with for a long time. When I did the self-love challenge a few weeks ago, one of the things I challenged myself was to not worry about my to-do list, and that I challenged myself to not have one, if that makes sense, and to just kind of go with the flow and not tie my sense of accomplishment for the day to how I felt about myself. And it was very liberating to be able to just be like, well, I didn't get it done, and who cares? Like, it doesn't change who I am. It doesn't change what I am. It doesn't change any of those things. Like, and it was so amazing. And I'm really glad that I challenged myself to that one in particular, because it is a really big challenge for me. And I've gotten better at it over the last few weeks. I don't think I'm, perfect at it by any means, but anyway, so I appreciate that. There's a book, you made me think of a book called The Best Yes. And I've talked about this book a couple times. I want to say it's by Lisa Turkhurst. And it's about people who can't say no and people pleasers. And I have suffered from that my whole entire life. My husband is kind of my gatekeeper. And one of the suggestions she made in the book is find somebody who will help you say no until you get enough, not self-worth, but enough strength within you to be able to say no yourself. So you run everything through this agent, if you will, like, let me check with so-and-so to make sure, And another suggestion she gave was to say no. You can say, my heart wants to say yes, but my calendar says no. And I'm really sorry about that. I wish I could, but it's just not going to fit right now. And those two things have been really helpful for me. And I tend to overcommit myself, and because I don't want to put people down. And I feel like my self-worth is tied to what people think of me. And if they think that I'm helpful and nice, then I'm a good person, right? Like, the more helpful I can be to people and the more yeses I can give, the more Christ-like I am. Seriously, these are like real thoughts of mine.
Like, because there's a barometer, right? Like, here's Jesus, and then like here's all these things, like,
right. I've always thought my whole entire life, like, the more Christ-like I can be, the better of a person I am, which means, okay, how do I be Christ-like? Well, he was serving all the time.
Yeah.
And wait a second, he actually was not serving all the time, peeps. That was like the biggest revelation I had a couple years ago, realizing that even Jesus took time out for himself. He went up to the mountain. He walked away from like a big crowd of people and said, hang on a minute, right? Like, he took time to be away from people. He took time to refuel himself.
Yeah.
He did self-care.
Yeah. That's
we don't talk about it.
That's what kind of spiraled me into wanting to write a book that covered some of the Latter-day Saint teachings of boundaries, because we don't really talk about it that much as a culture and a church. And just barely, the church released For Strength of the Youth magazine for August, and it talks about setting healthy boundaries. And I think that's what spurred this conversation, as I was talking about boundaries. But some of the boundaries that I found that the Savior set are really kind of spiritual and sacred when you think about it. And one of the first boundaries that comes to my mind is after he's resurrected, he presents himself to Mary, and Mary tries to touch him, and he says, "Don't touch me." I'm like, "Ugh, that's an excuse for me to tell my kids, don't touch me." Just kidding. Moms get touched out. And then there was another time, right, where, and he said the reason why: I have not ascended to my Father in heaven yet. Okay.
And so, I'm sure he wanted her to. He loved
that's the whole,
right?
I think the premises of that is that we can set boundaries and still have intimacy, right? Like we can still have this. And then some of the other ones is just in the way that he taught, right? Like, and he actually didn't allow Pharisees to say certain things. He rebutted those. And so boundaries can even be standing up for what we believe in. Sure. And, everything and I just started kind of studying the word bound, because the Lord says we're bound to him. And you can, if you study the commandments, you can kind of see them as boundaries that protect you, your mental health, your physical, spiritual health. And so really there's a lot of examples where the Savior, I mean, he does it perfectly, but we can learn from those to say, and they can be baby steps. They can be very small things. And so I appreciate you talking about saying no, because saying no is a boundary too. And if you want to do something out of resentment to get closer to Jesus, like that's not the recipe he gave us, right? Like how much can you, it's not good for anybody. Imagine the person that you're serving, finds out that you just hated being there the whole time.
There's that scripture in, gosh, I can never remember it, but it says if you don't do it with love, it's like worthless. And that's the point of service, is if you don't have charity, which is the pure love of Christ, while you're serving that person, you're there out of obligation, or you're there because you want something in return, or you're there for all the wrong reasons. It's as if you didn't do it. And that was the other thing that I had to learn, was that me just serving people all the time is not going to get me closer to heaven. And my heart is what matters, right? Does that make sense? Like, it's not just my actions, it's my heart and where I'm at. And there's so much we can unpack there. We're running low on time. I wanted to real quickly say the other thing in the book that she said about saying no is that you're really saying yes to something else, right? And there's another book that my husband read, that Jake read, that's a very similar concept. And I can't remember what it's called now. I'll see if I can find it and put it down below. But he really liked this one. And it's kind of the same idea. Like, if I say no to doing whatever it is, that means I'm saying yes to my kids, or saying yes to my husband, and saying yes to my other priorities. And if my priorities are in order, these different things, like if whatever I'm saying yes to does not fall in line with my priorities or my goals and things like that, it's okay to say no to those things. And it has been a long journey for me. I first read that book, gosh, 5 years ago, I want to say. And I feel like I'm finally getting pretty good at saying no. My husband would say I'm really great at it, but but for other reasons. So anyway, thank you so much. Is there anything else on boundaries that you would suggest? Like, if you were to look back at where you were, if there's a piece of advice that you could give yourself a few years ago in regards to this, what would it be?
Yeah, it would be to respect other people's boundaries. And it can be really hard. I became a stepmom of a 5-year-old, and I was a professional nanny prior to that in New York City. So I thought we were going to like co-parent and have like the time of our lives. Come to find out, she wasn't really interested in building any type of relationship with me at all. And it was only through like prayer and fasting and asking God, like, how can I serve this woman? The Holy Ghost just said, like, love her son. And like, I did it. I went all in. It's completely transformed our relationship. And now I am so grateful that someone set a boundary like that with me, because it transformed my life in a way that was a billion times better than if I would have got what I wanted. And so I would say take those boundaries to the Lord, like what you want and your desires, and be open to building something that you never really imagined. Because I think as you progress, you'll start to see that your boundaries are there really. They might be painful if someone puts a boundary on you, but to love them with empathy and figure out ways that it works for you, and they'll come around. And I don't have that end of the story right now. I'm still loving him with all my heart, and I wouldn't trade that for the world.
And he's so cute. Oh, your kids are adorable. I think that's got to be, it is hard to respect other people's boundaries, especially if you feel like their boundaries are inappropriate.
Yeah, I feel like
Helpful,
I'm amazing, right? I'm amazing.
You are amazing. Why can't we be friends? I don't get it. But
like, that's not right. That's not my place to do that. So,
well, and I think you brought up a good point. It's not always about you, right? It's not always about me, right? Their boundaries are about them. And if you truly are an empathetic and loving, compassionate person, then you'll respect that person for having the boundaries that they have. And I'm a firm believer in karma. What goes around comes around. And if you can love people, eventually
you love yourself more too.
Yeah. You're amazing. I think we could literally go on for hours talking
next time.
Other things. So we'll go again. We'll go for a round 2, maybe round 3 or 4. Especially once we get those books of yours out. I can't wait to read those. You're amazing, Jenny. Thank you so much for the spur of the moment interview.
Yeah, thank you. I love talking with you. So any chance I can do that, I'm gonna do it.
You're amazing. Guys, click the subscribe, click the like, share, do all those things. It helps us build the channel so we can reach more people and help the message and spread the messages of love and hope, and really get these words of wisdom out. And boy, were we richly blessed today. Thank you so much for that. I'll put Jenny's links below and stuff so you can reach out and follow her and stuff too. So you will be so glad you did. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for helping us grow our channel. Love you. Bye.